the universe of startups, vision is just the beginning. Our startup leaders share the lessons that build the future. Join the conversation.
Hey, I'm Vicky, and this is the Just Be Better podcast with our Startup Leaders Talk segment, where we dive into the minds of founders and execs who are shaping the startup ecosystem. If you're just listening and prefer to see our faces, head over to our YouTube channel at Just Be Better with Vicky. We love it when you tune in and join the conversation. It not only helps the algorithm, but also makes our guests feel seen and heard. Today's guest is Tash Bristowe, a passionate and driven startup specialist with a focus on HR tech and workplace well-being. As a founder and a community builder, Tash thrives in the fast-paced world of startups, creating meaningful change in how we work, connect, and support one another. Tash, I'm very excited to have you here today. Could you start by briefly introducing yourself to our audience, please?
Yes, hi Vicky. So my name is Tash Bristowe. I am the founder of Kimward Consulting, aka me, freelancing, and a community called the Open to Work Connection community as well. I recently launched Kimward because I found myself unemployed at the end of last year, year before now, 2023, after losing my job quite suddenly. And that sort of threw me into the world of freelance, which I've been doing now for just over a year. And that led me to launch Kimward and to go kind of feet first into being freelance.
Perfect. And then when you look through your whole career, I really love starting at the very beginning. Mm-hmm. So what was your very first paid job and how did it shape your perspective on work in general, do you think?
God, like my very, very first paid job?
Yes, your very, very first paid job.
Well, actually, when I was like really, really young, I used to, this is kind of gross, I used to pick horse manure and sell it on the side of the road.
Okay, can you elaborate on this a little bit?
I used to sell that. So we lived like somewhere where there were horses, and so I would go and do that because people would stop and buy it for their gardens. So that was my first ever paid job. But then after that, I think when I was about 13, 14, I worked in a pub washing up, basically being the pot wash. It was interesting. I guess I started working quite young. It was just a job to get a bit of money, but I think I've always had a fairly strong work ethic.
And clearly very entrepreneurial.
Yeah, exactly. There's an opportunity everywhere.
So what led you to your current path or venture, and what keeps you passionate about it?
Kind of going way back, when I was at school, I always used to say that I wanted to be a youth therapist, was what I would say. I guess when I was like sort of 15, 16, saw lots of people around me struggling with their mental health. I struggled slightly. And it was very much this kind of conversation of, you know, teenagers and their hormones. And it made me I guess I just wanted to help people. But that was an area that I felt really strongly about. And I was also really passionate about like charity. So for my sort of work experience when I was really young, I worked for a charity called Changing Faces, which was supporting people with disfigurements. And so, yeah, I think from a young age, I knew I wanted to help people. And then when I went to uni to do childhood studies, which was kind of, I saw was going to kind of support me on this path to become a therapist. But I dropped out of uni because I actually started struggling really badly with my mental health. And I had to defer my place and kind of leave to get better. And so when I did that, it then led me to not wanting to go back. So yeah, I'd sort of almost had to park the idea of being a therapist because I didn't want to go back to uni. I knew I wanted to move to London and try that sort of path, but I couldn't afford to do a course and move to London. And so I was like, right, I'll just sort of park that for now and try and get into like working and earning money. I was working in retail and then I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I got a receptionist job and thought, oh, if I if I become a receptionist, then that could lead me into lots of different industries to kind of get a foot in the door. And then that eventually I then became a receptionist for a recruitment agency. So that's where I then got into recruitment and I guess the corporate world. When I was in that job, I think fill that void that I was missing of kind of the areas that I wanted to do when I was younger, I then sort of became the internal mental health champion or CSR and kind of was doing that within the workplace, which has then led me to now being in, workplace wellbeing and kind of driving that forward.
And when did you fall in love with startup ecosystem?
I was the first employee for this recruitment startup where we went in-house. So that was my first experience of working at a startup and I just absolutely loved it. I loved being so close with the founders and the building of a business and having a voice and being able to really learn about how to grow a business and it all, it being on all of you. You're not just kind of what I felt, I guess, previous to that was a cog in the machine or whatever the saying is. I actually felt like I was, my voice was heard and I was, being a part of that growth. So I was working there and then I moved to Sanctus, which is a kind of mental health and coaching organisation. And then, since then I've always been in startups. So that's where I first started and realised that I just love the impact that you can have. And also how much you learn, you just learn so much.
You obviously worked with quite a few different startups by now. How do you think the approach towards mental health changed over the years, or did it change?
When I joined Sanctus, Sanctus was one of the earlier organisations that were normalising the conversation around mental health, supporting your mental health in a proactive and preventative way rather than it being reactive, bringing your whole self to work, bringing it into the workplace, all of these things that are now, lots more people are talking about. I think it's come a really, really long way, but I do have to caveat that with it's come a really long way, I guess, in the world that I know, and the world that I know and my network tend to be the people that, and the organizations that are driving that change. Whereas I think there's lots of industries and lots of organizations out there that there is still so much work to be done.
I already told this joke before on my episodes, but one of the worst things that I heard about mental health in general, I was interviewing for the head of people role, someone who was meant to be my boss. And I always used to ask the question, what's your opinion on mental health in the workplace, how it should be addressed, what should be done? And the person who, keep in mind, was meant to be my boss and come in as a head of people looking after the whole company, answered in saying that mental health is completely made up thing. This is a massive bubble that's going to burst. No one's going to believe it in a couple of years, and we need to just suck it up and go with the flow. And I was like, what on earth is happening here? So I think that you're nicely touching on the fact that within certain circles, it's a lot of improvement.
Yeah.
But I had to see different side where people still think it's a made up bubble.
Totally. Yeah. I often speak to friends and people, I guess, that I know outside of the people that I know through work and certain industries. And then I sort of am brought back to reality a little bit, how people are viewing mental health in the workplace.
Taking you back to your personality and personal traits, do you have any specific strategies or habits that you think helped you succeed in your role or businesses in general?
I think for me, I've not had a North Star when it comes to work because I was unsure. The thing that I wanted to do, I couldn't. And so I very much met each opportunity as the way to learn and grow and meet new people and trust that it would get me to whatever the next step was. And I think I feel really grateful for that. It's not it's not being driven. It's just that I feel like I haven't put that huge pressure on myself to get to X, Y, or Z. I've just, found myself working somewhere and wanted to be really, really good at it, or wanted to put everything into it in that moment. And yeah, I feel grateful that that's been my approach to work, because I know that it's not for a lot of people, but it's really helped me. There's two other things. One is just growing the people that you meet and the people in your network. Like, everyone's busy in the world that we live in, and it's such a culture where we just, if you're not drowning, then what are you doing? And I'm really guilty of that. I think lots of us are. It's just kind of what's been created, and I hate it. But speak to people, reach out to people. If someone asks to speak to you, like, speak to them. Like, I just think you never know what that conversation might do years down the line, in a month's time, what you might be able to do for them, what they might be able to do for you, what you're learning. I think it's like really so valuable. With saying that, also you have to like look after your own boundaries, and I totally get that. So there's a limit and there's a balance, and everyone's different. But I think try and not be too laser focused on what that thing can give you like right now, and know that connections are really, really important. And then another final one is something I'm still working on is not putting my whole value on the companies like I work with. Like I give so much. I want to work for organizations and I want to live and breathe them. And so that's why it's really important for me to work for businesses that I actually care about, and that are doing things that, I couldn't really do it any other way. But equally, you have to remember that it's work, and you are disposable, like to businesses, and you have to just remember that like line that they are an organization, you're an employee, it's not your business. If you are, if you're working for a startup, I think you can very easily just become so ingrained in it, which is amazing. But it's just important to have that knowledge that can also be quite challenging as well.
I think it's more of a challenge in a startup ecosystem in general than in a big corporate, because especially if you join very early stage, you are responsible for so many different things, and you are directly contributing towards the growth of the business and the success of the business, or the failures of the business as well. And then you take everything very personally. So if whatever happens, you still give a piece of yourself to that business.
Yeah.
And it's a very hard line not to cross.
Yeah. And I think with startups, like what I've realized, I wouldn't say that this is like 100%, but for now, what I've seen is that I really thrive and enjoy like a startup to a certain point, and then it's knowing that, okay, now it's got to this point, it's probably best for me to leave, just from experience and like what I've seen. And I think that can be really challenging for a lot of people when they're with an organization from the start. And then it gets to that point where it just changes, and that is the reality. And then you've got the people that have created the business up until that point, and they're sort of fighting against the change, and that's really exhausting. Whereas I think there's a lot of power in saying, okay, you know what, like I've had my time here, and understanding that about yourself. Yeah, that's what I sort of have learned, possibly the hard way at points.
And by now you've built and led several communities, both online and offline. What do you think is the key to creating a truly engaging and supportive community, especially in the fast-paced world of startups?
I think with community, I'm still learning. I'm always learning. I think for me with building communities, it's been more of, there's been a need. And I've sort of facilitated that through, I think, having a network on LinkedIn. Ultimately, I've been able to be the one that can create that space and connect other people. So it's really been the fact that there's a need. So for me, I think with community, not always, but from what I've experienced, is that there needs to be a need, and to build it with the community. You can't guess what that community needs. So yeah, to build it with them at the same time and be open to it being not linear and changing and stuff. But yeah, to be honest, I really feel like I'm still learning when it comes to communities. Like, I think community means different things to different people. It's so sort of abstract in a way, and I love that about it. I think before I ever like built a community, I've always been passionate about community, like outside of a business sense, because of what community makes people feel. For me, that's what's so special about community. But there's so many other things that community brings as well. From a business level, you've got like the brand awareness piece as well. You've got that kind of learning piece, like peer-to-peer learning and support. So there's just, yes, there's so many things in terms of what that looks like. And I think it's also something that I found really interesting was, so I've run a community called the Open to Work Connection Community, which I started when I lost my job, and really it was just a case of putting it out there to other people that were job hunting, because the job market is so rough at the moment. It has been for a really long time, and I ended up just creating a Slack space. And to be honest, now I'm working, I don't really put a lot into that community, but people in the community sort of support one another. I just haven't had a lot of time. But I remember at one stage, there wasn't a huge amount of engagement, and that was how I measured success. Engagement equals success. And then I had a few messages at separate times from people saying, "Hey Tash, like I was in the community, I never spoke in it, but I just got a job and I just wanted you to know, like, it was a lifeline for me," or something like that. And I was like, oh, that's really amazing. And that's really interesting. Like, just because I guess almost for my ego, I don't know if ego is the right word, but I wanted to see people chatting in there. Actually, for that community and for people that are open to work and for people that are exhausted, it might just be seeing that there are other people in the same boat, and that's enough. And that's what the community is, the purpose of the community serves for them. So I think also, when it comes to community and measuring success, it's going to be different for each one. And that was like a really interesting learning for me.
And what trends or shifts in your industry are you most excited about or concerned about?
There's, something I was only sort of speaking about the other day with one of my clients, which I don't know a huge amount about, but I think cuts to, DEI initiatives and things like that, and the knock-on effect and what that might continue to be when you're specialising in working for organisations that are selling into HR and L&D departments. What priorities are workplaces going to have with the changes that are happening there, which isn't something I had really thought about, but is quite terrifying, and something, I hope working with the right organisations, it won't have an effect. And then also AI. Again, I am not an expert. I don't know enough about AI to really say a huge amount, but I'm excited about AI and the opportunities that it's creating. So I think, I know there's going to be lots of changes, but in terms of knowing exactly what that means, I don't know, but I don't think I see it as a negative.
I think it's both the DEI and AI. It's going to take probably a year or two to see the consequences of both and how they're going to impact everything. So I'm hoping for the best, and that companies very quickly will realize that they made a mistake with DEI especially, but at the same time, I'm not that realistic about it. I'm just really hopeful. But anyway, if you look through your career, Tash, what's one mistake you've learned the most from in your career?
Can't think of anything off the top of my head. What's coming into my mind is, and I don't want to call it a mistake particularly because it was like a really good learning, but I think there was a time, and I've touched on this before, but put so much of like my self-worth and value into the organisation I was working for. And I think it's, again, it's not a mistake because I'm glad I did and I've learned from it, but it's definitely a learning of, having to protect that. But I can't really think of a mistake. That makes me sound weird because I've got loads.
I think it's always hard when, especially in our industries where we work, when you are used to making mistakes because you're testing a lot of the things.
Yeah.
You just take them as learning and not necessarily focusing on mistake as such.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, let's move on a different side. So what piece of advice you would give to someone just starting in startups?
One, I think if you're just starting in startups, like be completely aware with the fact that you might absolutely hate it. I think some people like love it and thrive in it, and some people absolutely hate it. And I really think it's quite a clear cut, like, you know, and that's completely okay. I think if you're someone that does realize that you thrive in it and that you love it, yeah, I mean, again, it kind of comes back to that, like, you know, you're in a startup, you're working for an organization, you really are building that business, but remember it's not your business. To be honest, you know, like, I think that doesn't mean that changes like anything that you do, like, but do remember that, because it's like, it's not, and you know, it can often feel like it is, and I think that's okay. And I think that you care so much and so deeply, and everything is okay, like, that's all okay. And it can lead to, you know, burnout, and it can just, you know, your expectations can almost be too high for certain things. So yeah, I think it's just an important one to remember.
Perfect. So as we finish the first part, I think I mentioned to you that the second part of the interview is Speedy Startup. So I'm going to pose 20 questions to you. It's almost like the first thing comes to your mind. That's what you say. It's 30 seconds for each question. Some of them are literally yes or no questions. Some of them are a little bit longer, but I'll try to keep my mouth shut and not interrogate you, because I normally have a habit of asking another 20 questions. So it's your question and answer. Are you ready to start?
Yes, I hope I can do this, because we'll see.
You'll be fine. So the very first question, Tash, what's the worst interview question you ever heard? Whether someone asked you or you asked someone, or you just heard as a third person?
Oh, I had one actually when I was job hunting for, like, when I lost my job like a year and a half ago. And it was something like, if you were a TV program, what would you be, or something? And I was like, interview is over.
Brilliant. It's remote, hybrid, or office?
Hybrid. Oof, actually, remote.
What's your favorite productivity hack or tool?
Well, productivity is something I really struggle with, because I put so much weight on it. But something that I've learned slightly is acceptance. If I'm really struggling with productivity, accept it, do something else, and it will come. Don't force yourself. It's something that it's a work in progress.
And you mostly answered this one, I have a feeling, but you might have another example. What's the weirdest job or project you ever had to do?
I worked in an ironing manufacturing company once. To go traveling, I worked in like loads of really odd jobs, and that was one. They had this like doll that like you put the shirt on and then you just press a button and it blew up and then came back down, and then the shirt was ironed, and that was my job all day.
To press the button.
To press the button.
As long as you were not imitating the doll.
No. No.
Early bird or a night owl?
Early bird.
If not your current role, what would you be doing instead?
Oh, work-wise.
Yes or no work at all?
No work at all, in a camper van travelling around with Piglet, my dog.
What's your go-to karaoke song?
Well, I hate karaoke.
No go-to song.
No go-to song.
Describe your company culture in one word, or in your situation, since you work with quite a few, describe the company culture in one word that you think should be.
Authenticity.
What's the most overrated buzzword in business right now?
That's such a good one, and I can't think. I don't know.
We can come back to that one in case you... What's one thing you wish you could automate in your life?
Lifeman.
What's your biggest work pet peeve?
Blame culture.
Most underrated skill in business, in your opinion?
Authenticity.
Should salary be always included in job ads? Yes or no?
Yes.
What role will disappear first because of AI? This is, I have to put a disclaimer, is hypothetical. We're not making any roles disappear. We're just hypothetically guessing.
I sort of think this is only because like virtual assistants are already a thing. So like PAs, EAs, possibly.
What's the best advice you ever received career-wise?
That is also really, really hard. Something I can't remember who would have told me this, but when I'm like really, really stressed, and obviously this doesn't work for people that are doing this, but I have to tell myself a lot, I'm not saving lives. And that really helps me, because sometimes you feel like so overwhelmed and so stressed, and it's like the reality of what you're stressed about is, you know, you're not saving lives. So I don't know who ever told me that, but it helps me come back down to earth, I think, and realise.
Finish this sentence. Startups are
chaotic.
What advice would you give to someone considering working in a startup again?
If I was doing a different one, would be adaptable. Like you have to be open to doing lots of different things, like, and not just staying in your lane, which again is why some people love it and some people don't.
What's one mistake you think all founders make?
I think that's really interesting. I think founders, to be founders, have to be so optimistic that sometimes it's not realistic.
I think I mentioned this before, that each of my guests pose a question to the next guest. So you have a question from my previous guest, Mark Fletcher. And his question to you is, what is the book, podcast, or resource you feel most helpful within the industry right now?
I think there's two books that my founder has given me, like my founder at Tiller, Hass, who that I just love. So one is Atomic Habits, and one is No Bullshit Strategy. I really love those two.
Perfect. And could you pose a question to my next guest? I'm not going to tell you who it is.
Oh.
It's either a founder or an executive within a startup ecosystem.
Okay. What's your superpower and what's your kryptonite?
It's actually a really good question. It's a hard one as well. But thank you so much, Tash. It was absolutely wonderful to have you here today. And thank you to everyone who tuned in. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And if you really loved it, you can even buy me a coffee. I'll leave the link below. See you next time, and until then, try to be just a little bit better.
Thanks for being part of these journeys. Keep leading, keep building. See you next time. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your insights.